This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusiak, and this is episode 263. At the end of the program, we'll have a special message from the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Alexandra Hitchi. Today from Thunder Bay, we'll reprise a story you heard in November 2018 about a remote First Nations community called Marten Falls. But first, from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress's Triennial Convention in Ottawa, recorded November 2019. Here is an advocate and politician, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations since December of 2014, Perry Bellegarde.
Southern Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory. I say, Jak się masz? A дуже добре. Добрий день. Добрий день. So, I spoke a little Cree and a little bit Ukrainian, so I can say I'm a Ukrainian. In Cree, I said, I'm very happy to be here. And from a small reservation in southern Saskatchewan called Little Black Bear. And I didn't go to a residential school. And I didn't go to the day school on Little Black Bear. Indian Affairs had a busing program at that time. And it was an integration of our people, of First Nations people, into the provincial school system. So I went to school in Goodieve, Saskatchewan, from grade 1 to grade 9. And every morning we would hear, oh, dobre den studente. And we would hear, oh, dobre den ponochetoyo. And then our lessons would begin. I share this history in the sense of going to school with the Atemachuks and the Denishuks, Kuzakavich, Milton Issel, the Piastas, the Uristis, all these people, like there was Ukrainian farmers, Russian farmers, there's the Heikerts, the Germans, and we shared, we say, a history of coming together as First Nations people and as Ukrainian people. When you think back to the history, the starvation that your people endured in the 1930s, the genocide, how similar is that to our people? The First Nations people were starved with the killing of the buffalo in the prairies. And then the sicknesses that were inflicted upon our people through smallpox. And then the genocide of the residential schools. So there's a similarity of the genocide of our peoples. And we've persevered. And we have much hope to give to our little ones. That we can create a country that's built on respect of these beautiful languages that we share, the beautiful histories that we bring together, and embrace that concept that Canada as a country is stronger because of that diversity. And so here we are. So we have a shared past. More than ever now, we have a shared future. There's no question. Even in the sense, the stories of growing up together and all these wonderful names, because they're best friends of mine growing up in Goodieve, Saskatchewan. My wife and I, Val, we went to the 100-year anniversary of Goodieve being a small village back in 2009. And there was a parade through town of Goodieve. We had to circle it about 20 times because it's so small, but we kept going in circles with the parade. But it was a huge parade. And then we started talking about how we work together in schools and all my best friends. And I was just home on the weekend to Little Black Bear. So I was in background, Goodieve and Hubbard, Ituna Town area. But we started talking about some of the old stories long ago of how even, yes, our people shared this suffering. But even on the prairies long ago, and I talked to the Kurczynski family, and Emil Kurczynski and Kirby Kurczynski used to work for the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs as the Regional Director General. Well, their great-grandfather said it this way, that if it wasn't for the First Nations people, their people would not have survived. This is their truth. So I asked, can I share this story, Kirby? He said, go ahead. His great-grandpa and his great-grandma, they were on the prairies, but there was not a lot of housing and everything else. They come in to settle and farm So they had sod huts, but before the winter came, they were living basically in a hole with a buggy board over them. And they were hungry. So it was First Nations people that brought in food, venison, and everything else. And they helped them survive. So when they were the RDG for Indian Affairs, the Regional Director General, we got tons of support. Tons of support. Because we wouldn't be here as Korchinskis if it was not for First Nations people. And so I share that story about how we have a shared past and a shared future, because even when I was a young boy growing up, how we trade with the local farmers, because we never had cattle, but they did. And so we'd go trade for cream, fresh cream. Oh, that was good over porridge. Fresh cream, trade for deer meat. Everybody got along. Everybody worked together because we survived together. And of course, the First Nations people from Blackbird would be on the First Nations bus. But when we started making good friends, the white little boy on the Indian bus came home with me to the reserve, and then the Indian boy went on the Ukrainian bus over to Hubbard to go to the Rokish farm. So there was already a getting along and an integration. And the Ukrainian people were always close to me, and I close to them. The Chernetskys and the Bohes and another good Ukrainian family, friends of ours, John Hritzak and Judy Hritzak. They're in Regina. You look at it across Canada, and there's 634 First Nations across Canada. And we're about, I notice your statistics, about 1.3, 1.4 million people. Same with us. There's 203 First Nations in British Columbia, reservations. In Alberta, there's 47. In Saskatchewan, there's 74. And Little Black Bear is one of those 74. In Manitoba, there's 66. In Ontario, there's 134. In La Belle Province de Quebec, there's 47. There's 13 in Nova Scotia. There's 15 in New Brunswick. 2 in Prince Edward Island. 2 in Newfoundland. There's 14 in the Yukon. And there's 28 in the Northwest Territories. 634 First Nations. But over 60 different nations and languages. All distinct, all unique. And so there's diversity. So even amongst our people, there's diversity. So we're about 1.4 million people. And when we use that word genocide, we don't use it lightly. Because again, the starvation, the residential schools was a genocide of our people. There's no question. But you know what? I say we learn from the past. Even that thing called the Indian Act in 1876 was put in place. It's a federal piece of legislation. You weren't allowed to leave the reserve without a permit until 1951. If we were farmers, we couldn't sell our grain without a permit. Couldn't cut down trees to sell pickets without a permit. Weren't allowed to a lawyer without a permit in 1951. And then we weren't allowed to vote till 1960, 61. So we feel that pain of oppression and termination of rights and title to land and territory. So that's why I say we have a shared history, but a common vision as well. And that's what I want to get into. Because I always say, one should always try to leave more hope in a room than when you walked in. And that's what I want to do here today. Because it's all about building a better country. And so, reconciliation. In 2015, we talked about reconciliation and how can we go about improving things. Because according to the United Nations Human Development Index, Canada is rated up here 6th in terms of quality of life. But you apply the same indices to First Nations people, we're 63rd. This Liberal government has done more for First Nations people than anybody in the last 50 years. And why I say that is because I look at the facts. I look at the facts. They've invested in boil water advisories. It's coming down from 130 plus down to 57. It's not done yet, but it's moving in the right direction. They invested in $21.4 billion over 7 fiscal years in the social detour like education, housing, water, infrastructure, all those things. That's 4 Kelowna Accords. That's a good thing. They passed a very important language bill, Bill C-91, for the revitalization and rejuvenation of all those 60 plus languages across Turtle Island, across Canada. That's important because that's one of those 5 elements, right? Language, land, laws, people, government. Language. And we've said that's so key because we do not want the residential schools to win. And they also passed Bill C-92, the effects of the residential schools, because of the genocide, the breakdown of identity, the breakdown of self, the breakdown of community, the breakdown of family. There's so much alcohol and drug abuse amongst our people, which results in a lot of our little ones being taken away into care. There's 40,000 First Nation children in foster care in the provinces. We need to fix that. Bill C-92. And so it's moving in the right way, but we're not done yet. So the theme I always say is maintain momentum. Yaradi, skazate, sashomi, bachimo, kroki, opravilnому, напрямку. So we are seeing steps in the right direction.
Nasha Kasha comes to you from Radio Western 94.9 FM on the campus of Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. We're heard on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, on CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, on Local 107.3 FM in St. John, New Brunswick, on CJAS Radio 93.5 FM in Saint Augustine, Quebec, on CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, on CFMU 93.3 FM in Hamilton, on CKMS 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, on CJAM 99.1 FM in Windsor and Detroit, on CKLU 96.7 FM in Sudbury, on CILU 102.7 FM in Thunder Bay, on 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg, on CJTR 91.3 FM in Regina, on CFMQ 98.1 FM in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, on CFBX 92.5 FM in Kamloops, on CJSF 90.1 FM in Vancouver, and on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo, British Columbia.
And so, priorities going forward. Number one issue for all of us. Not only in Canada, but throughout the world. It's climate change. And we can see what's going on in the world. The big winds, the fires, the floods, the storms. The animals are doing different things. In Korean we say, "Ka kianotentek no hakomagnak." We don't care if you're black, yellow, pink, or brown, or red. We're the two-legged tribe. We give thanks and acknowledge Mother Earth, our mother. We all come from Mother Earth. And then we say those four grandmother spirits, Nokomoak, grandmothers, look after the water. Rainwater, fresh water, salt water. And then when life comes, what happens? Water breaks. So we're all related. We're the two-leggeds. So what are we leaving for our children and grandchildren and those yet unborn, we say? So that's why we say climate change, climate destruction was the number one issue and priority. Then we talked about restorative justice. Because something is wrong in a system where we're 5% of the population, but 30, 40, some cases 50% of the jails are full. And so what do we look at? First Nations law, Creators law, in addition to common law and civil law. We want to start looking at that. And then we said, here's where we need your help. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a roadmap to reconciliation. So we need to see that federal legislation come into being. I also want to say 2019 is the year of the Indigenous peoples' languages of the world. And that's where I need your help. Because I've said our languages in Canada are Canada's national treasures. They're not spoken anywhere else. We don't have a country called Cree, our Nakota, our Mi'kmaq, our Algonquin, our Hul'qumi'num, Gitxsan, our Wet'suwet'en, our Dene. It's here. And so we have to do all we can to bring them back. So 1 year internationally, sure. It's a year of Indigenous languages. We want to lobby for that decade. And that's where we need to help each other. Because I heard earlier talk about how even the Ukrainians not strongly spoken as it used to be 30, 40 years ago. It used to be the number one language, right? Now it's kind of going down. But you can bring it back. You can bring it back. So my friends, my relatives, again, we have a shared past. But more importantly, we've got a shared future together. We are the two-legged tribe. And if you embrace that worldview, you can see we're all in it together. Not only in Canada, but throughout the world. Even in Ukraine. We have to work together to provide that hope for our children and grandchildren. And so I'm very honored to be here. I thank you for listening to my words. I'll say, Дякую and Slavia Ukraini.
So far in the program, you've heard the selection See a Shooting Star, performed and composed by Evan Wish. And this is the Prince Albert Veselka Choir. Veselka means rainbow, and the song Ishumeti Hude is about a whole lot of noise and fuss. For this next segment, I traveled to Thunder Bay on the north shore of Lake Superior. It was the fall of 2018. We'll hear about Marten Falls First Nation. It's also known as Agoki Post. Agoki means Ojibwe. The fly-in community is far, far to the north of Thunder Bay. And there, life is about to change.
Peel off the warning labels, where this mixture of frailties show our skin from under callous. Feel everything between us. Carry with me the oldest of boxes to the newest beginnings, over continents and prairies and rivers. If my fingers go numb from playing, will you blow across the tips so I can feel? If my fingers go numb from playing, will you blow across the tips so I can feel?
You're listening to Anishinaabe singer-composer Ansley Simpson. The song is called A Mixture of Frailties.
My name is Sandy Monius, and I'm the education director at Marten Falls.
We're in Thunder Bay. We're sitting in an office in Thunder Bay, but this is quite far away. It's actually north of Kenora.
Well, it's a fly-in community, 250 air miles northeast of Thunder Bay. You can fly from Thunder Bay, it takes about an hour to get there, or you can fly from Nikina, which is directly south. Originally, Marten Falls was about 50 miles west of the present community, at the actual Marten Falls site, where you did have a waterfall. But in 1921, the bush planes couldn't land there anymore, and also the firewood was depleted, the good firewood that people like to use, and Hudson Bay manager's wife drowned there, and there were other drownings too. People decided to move to the present site.
Drowned because with waterfalls there are rapids as well.
Yeah, and there's a stone memorial to her.
Are the people Anishinaabe?
Yeah, Ojibwe. They speak the Ojibwe language, Ojibwe and Cree. It's kind of a mix. People were trapping people in the area. They were very successful in trapping furs, mainly beaver and marten, and they lived off the land about 100 miles in each direction from the Marten Falls or the Ogoki site. The fall, spring, they were always out trapping and just came home to sell their furs, usually at the time when it wasn't the best for trapping, like the summer. The furs aren't that good. In the cold winter, it's hard to get around, so they traveled at that time to trap lines.
You're the education director here.
That's right.
Did you grow up in the area? Can you tell me about your youth?
I'm from the south of Ontario, and I married up in Marten Falls, and I lived there for 15 years in the community, and then I came out, and I've been going back ever since. I have children up there, and I have children here in Thunder Bay.
There were issues and are issues with drinking water up there. How did they come about?
Well, the old system was not a good system, more or less, and I think it was to do with backwater. Well, it's the system, but right now they're building a new water plant, so it should solve these problems. I think the issue is being addressed right now.
And you said that there's word about building a road as well.
The Ring of Fire, which is chromium, nickel, copper deposit north of Agoki, about 100 miles. Of course, the government's interested in accessing this ore, and so are, of course, the mining companies. They've been talking about a road to this area, and which would include Ogoki, since it's probably a side road to Ogoki.
Are the Marten Falls peoples in favor of the mining, or do they see this as a good, beneficial prosperity or an intrusion?
It can be both. It would be a large influx of tourists and people disrupting the community, but it could also bring cheaper freight, cheaper transportation means. Right now it's like $325 to fly from Thunder Bay to Agoki, and it's $1 a pound for freight from Thunder Bay.
And so far the water is also being flown in bottles.
It is, until they get the new water plant going.
What do you, as an educator, want people to understand about your people?
Well, I think people in Ogoki need the same opportunities that people in the South have with regard to education, and the Internet's helping in this regard. All the high school kids have to fly out to get educated. We don't have a high school in Ogoki, so education is only up to grade 8. After that, the students have to board in Thunder Bay or Geraldton or other communities, which is very difficult and disruptive, and it's hard for the students. They get lonely. Not all positive influences. There are good experiences, but of course it's hard for young people to resist, all the temptations that a big city provides.
People of Ukrainian heritage, when they can, they try to pass their language on to their children, and that's, in some cases, that's very hard. How is language retention up there, or relearning the language?
Well, you have a native language teacher in the school, the elementary school. There's a language revitalization project happening, and this project is not just Ogoki, but it's other communities as well. They have someone from New Zealand who's very successful in bringing the language back. Actually, they did it with the Maori language in New Zealand. In 1975, the majority of people spoke the language. Over 80% of the people spoke the language. That's not the case today.
Is there something you'd like to leave as a thought?
Well, I think food is always important, and people up in Ogoki, you see the high price of bringing food in, but they're used to traditional food. Having a simple, good diet, and I think Ukrainian people have a simple, good diet, with cabbage rolls and pierogies and all these different dishes that you hear about, and I enjoy myself. So I think we have a common interest there in good, simple food.
And there's a postscript to my interview with Sandy Munius about the community of Marten Falls, Agoki Post. The late Gord Downey of the rock group Tragically Hip, before he died, wrote a song about a 12-year-old boy named Charlie Wenjack, lonely and forced into a life away from his people. Charlie ran away from a residential school in Kenora in October of 1966. He tried to walk 600 kilometers home to Agoki Post. He died of exposure and hunger. You're listening to the Antiphony Orthodox Trio from Birmingham, Alabama. And here is Alexandra Hitchi, president of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress.
The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress and the Ukrainian-Canadian community join the Secwepemc people Indian residential school survivors, their families, and their communities, the First Nations of Canada, and all Canadians in mourning the memory of the 215 Indigenous children whose remains were recently discovered on the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. The announcement of the confirmation of the mass grave was made by Chief Roseanne Casimir on May 27th. Te Kamloops Te Secwepmich is the home community of the Kamloops Indian Residential School, which was the largest school in the Indian Affairs residential school system. Many Indigenous children who were sent to residential schools never returned to their home communities. Some ran away, others died at the schools. The students who did not return have come to be known as the missing children. The Missing Children Project documents the deaths and the burial places of children who died while attending the schools. To date, more than 4,100 children have been identified. These innocent lives were taken as a result of a racist and discriminatory policy of removing Indigenous children from their homes and forcing them into residential schools. Many of us are parents. All of us are someone's children. It is impossible to comprehend the pain and suffering that was endured by thousands of children, parents, and grandparents whose families were torn apart by the callousness and cruelty of this government policy. The discovery of the grave of 215 children on the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School is a stark reminder of this shameful era in Canadian history. It is a reminder of our collective responsibility and the need for unity, understanding, and empathy in addressing the horrible trauma suffered by the First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit communities of Canada. May the memory of the victims be eternal. Wieczna ich pamięć.
We